Thank you very much, David, and welcome everybody to this session, How the Law Killed Digital Financial Advice. The conference organisers asked me to try and keep the session short to a maximum of 5 slides, so I'll do my best. Now, I'm very nervous this morning because I'm speaking to an audience of predominantly lawyers. I'm not a lawyer myself, and I'm concerned that I'm going to get sued. So I thought I should start with a disclaimer. Have a quick read of that. Continues on to the next slide, slide 3. There's slide 4. And I've realised I'm all out of slides. I'm up to slide 5. So thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience. Now, in all seriousness, this is the dilemma that financial advisors face every single day, because on the one hand, under the Corporations Act, we are required to communicate in a manner that is clear, concise and effective. And on the other hand, we have checklists from ASIC of what needs to be included in an advice document known as a statement of advice. The checklists themselves run into multiple pages. And it's not surprising that statements of advice often go for 50 to 80 pages. They're completely incomprehensible, and as a result, nobody reads them at all. So let's look at what that does to the cost of financial advice. You can see here that over the last 3 years, the cost of financial advice has increased from $2,500 to $3,500, more than a $1,000 increase in 3 years, or a 40% increase. That's more than the inflation we're seeing on fruit and vegetables and rent and other costs of living. And it's got to the point where advice has become unaffordable. Let's compare this to what consumers are actually prepared to pay. They're only prepared to pay $500. So there's this massive gap between what people will pay and what it actually costs every year to obtain financial advice. And as a result, most consumers choose not to obtain financial advice at all. Now, I'd like you to meet Mike. I met Mike yesterday. He was my Uber driver, and he took me from the airport to my hotel. We had a good conversation. He asked me what I do for a living. I told him that I work in superannuation. And he said, "Oh, superannuation." He started telling me about the fund that he's in, the investment returns that he's had, how he invests his money, and trying to convince me that I should switch from my current superannuation fund into his one. Now, it made me wonder, how is it that we all make our financial decisions? Do we take advice from Mike, the Uber driver, or do we get our information from somewhere else? So I'm going to ask for a quick show of hands. Raise your hand if you would take Mike's advice. No? Nobody? Okay, well, who would pay over $3,500 per year to see a licensed financial advisor? We have 2 people in the room. Great, thank you. And which of you navigates the complex web yourself and uses Google? Quite a lot of you. Excellent, thank you. And then finally, who says I'm just going to throw in the towel, do nothing and accept the status quo? Maybe I'll be in the default fund that my employer has chosen for me when it comes to superannuation. And we've got a few of those as well. Thank you. The majority of you like to just navigate the complex web yourself. Some of you, I imagine, will do it well. Some of you won't do it so well. But I think we saw only 2 people in the room will pay a financial advisor $3,500 per annum. And that's consistent with what we see across the broader population as well. So what is that's causing this problem? Why is financial advice so expensive? So in my view, there are 4 different causes. The first one, the SOA, or Statement of Advice Requirements. So I mentioned earlier that ASIC has a long checklist, and one of the requirements is to meet, and David mentioned it earlier, one of the requirements is to meet what's known as the best interest duty. Now, on the surface, when you hear the best interest duty, you think, well, that must be a great thing. financial advisors have to operate in the best interest of their clients. What could go wrong? Well, when you look at the way that this is worded in the Corporations Act, the best interest duty is a lot more about the inputs, how the advisor goes about doing their research and providing the advice, as opposed to the output, the advice itself and the recommendations. It's very complex and cumbersome to navigate the different steps involved, and as a result, that creates a significant cost for financial advisors. The next one is compliance. So it's not just about producing the statement of advice for the client. There's a whole lot of other documents that need to be prepared and provided to clients, and documents that are required in the background, and lots of records that need to be kept, and different organisations that advisors need to belong to. And they each have their own training requirements and education requirements. Often they differ. So there's significant compliance requirements on top of writing the statement of advice itself. Then we have what's known as FASEA, which is the reasonably new education standards body. And the objective here, once again, it's a noble objective, raising the education standards of financial advisors, and we'd think, well, that's got to be a good thing. But let me give you an example, because it's gone too far. Let me give you a personal example. I have 3 degrees. I have a bachelor's degree in economics, majoring in actuarial studies. I have a master's degree in economics, and I have an MBA degree. I'm one of the more educated financial advisors around, and yet I don't meet FASEA's education standards. If I was to remain a financial advisor, I would have to go back to university, and I would have to study a 4th degree. So this is clearly over the top, and we're seeing as a result of this, a lot of financial advisors have chosen to exit the industry. About half of the advisors have exited the industry over the last 5 or so years, partly with the education requirements and partly the broader compliance regime. And then finally, we have the regulators that take all of this and they apply the law in a very black and white sense, and for reasonably minor breaches, they often try to make examples of people and examples of corporations. So who would want to be a financial advisor in that context? So those people that will spend a lot of time and effort on compliance and on paying people to assume that to make sure that every I is dotted and every T is crossed, and that all adds to the cost. So when we combine all of these things together, we have less financial advisors, a growing demand, a very complex regime, it's hard to comply, and all of that collectively pushes up the cost of seeing a financial advisor, up to $3,500 per year. What I'd like to talk about now is, what is it that financial advisors actually do? What's the scope of financial advice? Because I think when I ask many people, their response is, well, maybe if I inherited a few $100,000, I might go and see a financial advisor and they can advise me on how to invest that money. And that's certainly one of the things that a financial advisor would do, help you with your investments outside superannuation. There's a whole lot of other things that a financial advisor can and will help you with as well. And it's all of these. Should I buy an investment property? What should I do with my debt? Should I refinance it? Should I have an offset account, principal and interest, or interest-only loan? Help me with my budgeting, cash flow. How much can I afford to spend every year? Should I have insurance? How much insurance? What type of insurance? When can I afford to retire? What super fund should I be in? Maybe should I start my own self-managed super fund? How do I invest the money that's in super? Should I be contributing more to superannuation? What type of contribution? And if I'm a bit older, should I be starting a pension in superannuation and taking money out? And then there's estate planning and a whole lot of aspects that I haven't mentioned already. So there's very, very broad scope for what a financial advisor does. There are a number of digital advice businesses in Australia that have successfully tackled the first one of these, investing money outside superannuation. We were more ambitious. We tried to tackle all of these collectively and provide holistic financial advice in a digital sense. Now, I'd like to talk about the way that a financial advisor goes about this and the process that they follow. So they start off by collecting information to find out as much as they can about their client. What are their assets, their liabilities, their expenses, their income, their aspirations, their age, and so on. And then the financial advisor will apply some rules. I'll talk more about these rules in a moment. And then they'll make a recommendation in the form of a statement of advice, and this leads to a conversation. And after that conversation, sometimes the client will come back and say, well, I don't really like this particular recommendation. And then they can talk about, well, why don't you like that recommendation? Because it's consistent with the information that you gave me. And maybe that information needs to be amended in some way. Maybe the advisor misinterpreted or misunderstood the information. Maybe some information was missing. And so the advisor might go back and change that. To me, this is one area that a human currently performs really well compared to a digital advice solution. In fact, I think it's the only area a human performs really well. And I think that AI can resolve that as well and bring digital advice up to the level of a human by automating this conversation using natural language processing. I'd like to come back to the rules. So often I'll speak to a financial advisor and they'll say, well, it's impossible to automate the production of a statement of advice because I don't use rules, I use judgment. I take all of this information that the client has given me and I apply judgment and experience, and it's not just based on rules. So I strongly disagree with that. To me, if I'm presented with the same set of facts, every time I would give the same recommendations based on rules that I have in my mind. And I think other financial advisors are doing the same. They just don't realise what's actually going on in their mind and how they are applying these different rules. And if you can apply rules to a situation, then you can turn it into an algorithm and you can automate the whole process. And so that's what we set out to do. My business partner and I created a business called Plenty Wealth, and we automated the entire production of a statement of advice covering that entire scope that I showed you earlier. So how do we do that? So we started off by collecting bank data. Normally, I mentioned earlier, a financial advisor will collect information from their client and they'll ask the client questions such as, how much do you spend? Most clients don't know the answer to that. The ones that do typically underestimate it. But the bank data doesn't lie. So we knew more about the client's financial situation than they knew themselves. We knew their spending, how much they spent, what they spent it on, what they earned, what their liabilities were, what some of their assets were. And then we asked them a questionnaire to fill in the gaps. So this was all collected online. And then we applied an algorithm to work out which recommendations might be suitable for this client. We brought in life insurance and we produced what I believe was a compliant statement of advice. And I've got a dotted line there going to implementation because we partly automated the implementation process, and in time we had a plan to completely automate that as well. So that's what we did. We took a human process, we automated the whole thing. Now I'd like to talk about the benefits of providing digital financial advice as opposed to human advice. And there's one really obvious one that you would all be aware of that I'm about to tell you, and that is cost. It's much cheaper. Our marginal cost for every client was almost zero. And if you can provide a service and it costs you nothing, then you can price it to the customer much, much cheaper than the $3,500 per year that a human would charge. But that's not the only benefit. There's 4 others, and I call these the 5 C's. The first one is clock, or speed. So we could turn our advice around in 6 seconds. Typically, a financial advisor would take 6 weeks to turn around a statement of advice. Convenience. So our clients could request this advice from the comfort of their own home. They'd get the advice where they wanted it and when they wanted it. It could be midnight, weekend, whatever. And they'd still get that advice in 6 seconds. Consistency. So there were no errors. You didn't have the human error where you're providing the advice for Mr. Jones, but you accidentally type in Mr. Smith because that was the client that you prepared this template for the previous time. Perhaps if they were having a bad day, they left out a recommendation by mistake. The algorithm doesn't do that. And then finally, continuous. So instead of seeing a financial advisor once a year, as soon as their circumstances changed, we could give them updated advice. They got a salary increase. It came through in their bank data feed, so we'd know straight away. And so we could give them new advice saying, we saw you got a salary increase, now your circumstances have changed, here's your new advice. We could do that every day if we needed to. So much better experience here. I focus on this today because I think these are the benefits of any AI solution over a human-based solution. All of these are applicable not just to digital advice, but to AI and algorithms generally. There was an article written in the Financial Review by Alex Vikovich recently. He referred to us as being the Hyundai of financial advice. Why Hyundai? Because when you buy a car, you've got a choice between a basic car such as a Hyundai or a car with perhaps more features and arguably better quality such as a Mercedes. Now, as a society, we allow people to make that choice. But when it comes to digital financial advice, essentially, we don't. We say you either go for the Mercedes solution, the really expensive solution, or you get nothing because the law has made it too difficult to build the Hyundai, which would be affordable for most people and deliver exactly what they want, but just too hard to navigate the law in order to get there. So let me tell you a bit about our journey. We started off, we identified this concern back in around 2015, 2016. We built a prototype and we went to see ASIC. We approached ASIC, we said we'd like to talk about what we're doing. In that day, nobody was talking about digital financial advice in Australia and not many people overseas. ASIC looked at what we were doing. We had two really good conversations with them. Now, ASIC will never give you a green tick. ASIC will never say, yes, what you're doing is fantastic, go away and do it. And we're really happy with what you're doing. But they did make some suggestions to us. Of course, we took those on board. They asked some good questions. One of the questions they asked was around insurance and how we handle insurance, and we answered the question, and they appeared to be satisfied with our response. And based on that interaction, we launched. Shortly afterwards, they wrote to us. They asked some more questions. We responded to their questions. They collected some information, some examples of the advice we had given to clients. They reviewed it. They wrote back to us. They raised what they call some concerns. That doesn't mean we've breached the law. It just means they've got some more questions they want to look into further. We met with them and we managed to address all of their concerns. One of their concerns, again, was about insurance and how we handle insurance. And we managed to address them all. Some of them we addressed by clarifying their misunderstanding. Some of them we addressed by making some tweaks to our product. They wrote to us and they said, we think you've built a good product that will enhance customer outcomes. Now, that's about as good as you're ever going to get from ASIC, so we were really pleased with that, and we marched on with our journey. And they said they want to come back and review some more client files in the future. Then the Royal Commission happened. So then they reviewed some more client files. Now, nothing had changed. Our algorithm hadn't changed. The work we were doing for our clients continued to be the same. We gave them some more files that were similar to the previous ones. But this time when they wrote to us, they suddenly became very aggressive off the back of the Royal Commission. And this kicked off a 12-month legal process that cost me a significant amount of personal money and also took a huge emotional toll on me, on my wife, on my business partner. And in the end, my understanding is we managed to satisfy every single one of their concerns with the exception of one, and that was in relation to the way that we handled insurance. So this was something that twice before they appeared to be comfortable with, and now they weren't. And I'm sure with time we may have got them comfortable with that as well. But at the end of the day, this just took such a great toll, both financially and emotionally, that my business partner and I felt that it was time to move on to something else. Which really saddens me, not only for my own experience, but more importantly for consumers who are back to spending $3,500 a year on financial advice rather than being able to access something that's not only more affordable, but has all of those other benefits as well. So the next steps here. This story could have a happy ending. This photo is of a lady named Michelle Levy, and she's a partner at Allen's, and she is currently leading a government review into the financial advice industry called the Quality of Advice Review. And she recently released her preliminary findings, and they were that the entire system is much too complex. There's much too much red tape and regulation. We should do away with statements of advice completely. We should do away with the best interest duty, do away with a lot of the compliance regime, and make this much, much easier so that clients can get advice that is affordable and that they can comprehend. I think a lot of what she is recommending makes a lot of sense. Of course, it remains to be seen how that passes through the legislative and political process. Interestingly, if it does, and if her recommendations come to fruition, then there's this question, will it bring the cost of advice down to $500 per year? I don't know the answer, but it will certainly bring it down well towards that level, which will make advice far more affordable for the average Australian. One part that I find really ironic is if you can bring advice provided by a human down to that level, what does it mean for digital financial advice? Because you no longer need an algorithm to bring advice down in cost. There's still all the other benefits, but will digital advice have the same demand going forward as it would have when humans were charging $3,500? Now, I'd like to finish up here with just a few different considerations that have come to mind for me over this journey over the last 6 or so years. I'll just bring them all up because they haven't quite come up in the right order. So the first one, review and sign off. And these considerations, they apply for all AI software as well and applications. First one, review and sign off. Should there be a requirement for an independent review for any AI or any algorithm? The next one, moving down the page, licensing and liability. So what should the licensing regime be where you have an algorithm, and who is ultimately liable? Who's responsible? How do you sue an algorithm? The next one going down, incorrect data. So if the client provides incorrect or inconsistent data, what should be the responsibility of the algorithm to identify that and suggest rectification before the results are provided? The next one, encouraging innovation. Should the regulator have a requirement and a responsibility to encourage innovation and competition in their mandate? In my opinion, yes, they should. The one under that, human error versus systemic risk. So when a human makes an error, entering information, doing some calculations, there will be one client, one user that will be affected by that. Now, the human might make an error today, might make another error tomorrow, and another one the day after. Each time there's one user that's affected. When there's a problem with an algorithm, hopefully that doesn't happen very often, but when it does, hundreds or thousands of people can be affected. And over time, you weed all of those problems out, but in the short term, potentially a large number of people can be affected, which is why the testing of algorithms is so important. And then finally, some of you might be familiar with the trolley problem. So this is where you have a train going along a track, and it's on track to take out, let's say, 5 people. And the only way of stopping that is for you to pull a lever which will divert it onto a different track, and it will only take out 2 people, but a different 2 people. Is it ethical in order to do so? You're going to, on a net basis, you're going to save 3 lives, but you're going to kill 2 people that wouldn't have been killed otherwise. Is that the right thing to do or not? And my application of that to digital financial advice and to algorithms and AI is, in this testing phase, is it ethical knowing that you're going to make some mistakes and some people are going to be disadvantaged by those mistakes in the early days, knowing that as a result of that, you'll create a better product, and then hundreds or thousands or millions of people in the long term will be a lot better off. Not dissimilar from the testing of new medical solutions to problems as well. So that concludes my presentation. As I said, my name's Greg Einfield. There are my contact details. Feel free to get in touch with me. I'll be around for most of today. And feel free to call me, email me, find me in any way that you choose. And David, I think we've just got a couple of minutes for questions. Is that right? Excellent. Thank you. Happy to take any questions from the audience. Nate.
Very well done, Greg. Very well done. There's a lot of opportunity of what you presented there to combine what Alan was talking about with his natural language processing. Right up front with your customer questionnaire. Yeah, go right back to those. Yeah, there was a really good slide there. Right up front we had yes, with the natural language processing and the collection information. I think it's absolutely ripe in the time for it. So keep going.
Thank you, Nate. You're spot on. And I think that in terms of the product that we built, that was the big gap in relation to how you communicate the advice to the client and have that two-way conversation with them. Yep. And natural language processing is the obvious solution to that. Either at the time we weren't good enough to implement that, or the technology wasn't ready, or perhaps a combination of the two. The time is probably right to do that now. I agree with you completely.
Could you care to comment on reading somebody's bank statement using natural language processing to then categorize expenses that you wouldn't normally be able to pick up using the standard coding?
Yeah, so we were essentially doing that already, not using our own technology, but using somebody else's. And so as an example, if it said on your bank statement Coles, then we would know that that was groceries. And if it said McDonald's, we would know that that was food, just to give a couple of examples. But then there would be a description that was less common. And so natural language processing would be used in those situations to try and work out what those expenses were and to categorise them. And then there'd be the 5% that the system didn't know how to categorise, and we'd need the user to go and categorise that for us. And over time, that 5% would become 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, all done. Thank you very much.